So hello everyone, thank you for joining this session. I know it's a bit late, but bear with me. I'm probably between you guys and drinks later, so I apologize for that. But we'll try to make the best of it. So my name is Haider. I look after product marketing for Thalys's identity and access management business. My guess is, looking at the subject, we might have people from different domains over here, some of the folks perhaps from the identity and access management side, some maybe from data privacy, perhaps some who look after digital experiences as well. So I'm not going to do a show of hands thing with you guys. You've had too much exercise anyway in the past day and a half. So I'll just get straight into it. As I was preparing for this session, something that I got reminded of was an incident that happened, I don't know, probably close to 10 years ago. And I actually saw my daughter playing with one of her dolls, which I was pretty okay with, as in, it's good that kids are actually staying away from screens all the time. And I saw her kind of gently stroking her doll's hair, saying, "Oh, she has such beautiful hair, wavy hair, so on and so forth," and goes on to describe her dress, so on and so forth. And I just felt it was slightly different. It was almost as if she's presenting it to somebody. So I went up to her and asked her, as in, what exactly are you playing? And she's like, "Shh, I'm actually shooting a video on YouTube, and you're actually spoiling my review of this doll." I'm like, okay. And that's 10 years ago, right? The fact is, when you look at how our behaviors have evolved over time, both as trying to sell to people, as well as buying as consumers ourselves, a lot of things have changed over time. So when you look at the general cycle of product adoption in the past, right? So you still had to go through this awareness phase where you're trying to actually educate everyone about your brand, spending probably millions sometimes just to get your brand out there so that it has a bit of brand recognition, that you can actually build that trust with those consumers out there. And then eventually hoping that some of those consumers, they'll end up at, one of your brick or mortar stores, for instance, or one of your bank branches, for instance, and perhaps try one of your products. And if you're lucky, if your product is good, eventually you can potentially have a repeat purchase as well, and perhaps turn some of those consumers into loyal customers in the longer term. The issue, though, is this used to be a really long process, right? And now, when you are actually going into the digital age, your clicker stops working to begin with. And then you have the age of influencers, right? All you need as a retail company is, if you're about to introduce a new jacket, if you're about to introduce a new clothing line, for instance, you just need to get hold of one of those influencers. And I know some of the digital marketers over here might say, it's not that simple. And I know, you're right, it's not that simple. But essentially, the whole process of awareness to trial and eventually to make that purchase, that cycle has reduced drastically. So initially, if you were speaking about weeks or perhaps months for that awareness to take place, and eventually for that sale or that first sale to take place, now that cycle perhaps has turned down into days, and dare I say, sometimes even seconds. I mean, imagine you've actually seen somebody wearing a certain clothing line who's actually endorsing your product. You can potentially go and purchase it in a matter of seconds and then go ahead and leave a review on that product as well. So the whole process of creating that awareness and then eventually getting those people to actually turn them into what you could potentially call loyal customers, that cycle has reduced drastically. However, the flip side of it is, just as easy it is for them to go and leave a good review about you, it's equally easy for them to go and leave a terrible review about you as well. And that's essentially what we mean when we say you need to worry about the state of digital trust today, it is because this whole world is changing significantly. The dynamics of how you're actually dealing with your consumers online is evolving over time. And this essentially is, bread and butter for some of the folks who are actually developing those digital products out there today. So you have, on the one hand side, people who are dealing with the dilemma of collecting a lot of consumer data on one side. What they're trying to do is get that data so that they can actually produce much tailored products, much tailored offers for their consumers. But then at the same time, they have to deal with a lot of regulatory compliance as well. So if they're collecting all that data, obviously the regulators, they will be on their backs just to make sure that they're actually securing that data as well. At the same time, when you look at it from approaching the customers as well, and especially those who are in the banking sector, this term is very common for you, omni-channel, right? What you're trying to do is basically reach out to your customers on multiple channels, digital being just one of them, by the way. So there's this whole thing about, the physical channel hasn't really disappeared. You still need to have that interaction with your consumers as well. But the fact is, as and when you're introducing those new channels, you're actually introducing new threat vectors, as part of that digital journey as well. And then finally, of course, when you look at the other side, at the end of the day, as digital product managers, you're trying to build a lot more frictionless user experience for your users as well. But then at the same time, you have to deal with certain other things as well. So we spoke about compliance on one side, but what you also want to ensure is that you have the right kind of security in place as well. So there's certainly not an exhaustive list over here, but what I'm trying to depict over here is that the digital product managers or developers, they actually have to go through these decisions basically day in, day out in terms of producing the right user experience for their consumers. So what we did at our end was did a survey of about close to 12,000, 13,000 end consumers, just trying to understand how they are actually dealing with these different kind of digital services. We wanted to understand what are the different times on which they are engaging digitally with different brands, what kind of industries are they most interested in terms of, interested in the sense, they would be willing to share data with, and which ones they wouldn't be willing to share their data with. So obviously it's very difficult to go through each and every part of that report, but what I've done is obviously for these 20, 25 minutes, capture some of the nuggets which you can actually take with you guys as well, and perhaps share with you some actionable insight that you could leverage to actually build much trustworthy digital products as well. So first things first, there has been a general perception, obviously, with all of these breaches and all those things, that maybe consumers, they don't want to share their data, right? Maybe we are kind of invading their privacy anyway by collecting information about them. But having said that, in terms of the respondents that we reached out to, an overwhelming majority, they have said that they are actually willing to share their data. So that's fine. I mean, for the marketeers, that's music to their ears. But then at the same time, there are caveats as well. It's not just about them wanting to openly share that data as well. Because almost a third of them, they feel that they need to actually provide consent for you to actually use that data as well. Or then at the same time, another third of them, they feel that they want to actually control what kind of data they want to share with you and what they do not want to share with you as well. And not only that, I think when you look at some of the high-profile breaches that have happened over the course of the past few years, you'll come to realize, especially in cases where, for example, a certain celebrity, their account might have been hacked, for instance, those kind of incidents, they've actually created a sense of awareness in the general public as well. So you see, and again, this survey kind of validates that particular point. Your consumers are actually becoming a lot more aware of their privacy rights, if you will. And again, obviously, you have on the other side different kind of regulation that is kind of enforcing that point as well. But what's really important is your consumers actually do understand what they want in terms of data privacy when you're actually leveraging their data as well. And again, as part of that survey as well, what we came to realize was that if you go into more granular details with some of these consumers as well, you tend to realize that they have nuanced needs as well from different regions, from different industries, for example. So for instance, we have the more generalized figure over here of that 55% folks who actually want the right to be informed about how their data is being collected, or another 53% who want to have the right to actually be able to erase their data as and when they're required. Now, the issue though is you have this data, what do you do with it, right? I mean, this is what the consumers want, and perhaps it's also aligned with what your brand wants to do in terms of building trust with those consumers, but how do you actually end up doing it? First things first, think about privacy by design. When you're building those digital products, you need to be thinking about this privacy part from day one. It shouldn't be an afterthought just because, I don't know, GDPR is enforcing it on you, or perhaps because the new regulation, what's it called, the APRA, is it? Somebody help me out here. That's coming out, or at least being discussed at this point in time, where they're trying to actually have a federal regulation in the US for data privacy for end consumers as well. Point is, as a brand, that should not be your motivating factor to actually have privacy controls inside your digital experiences. It is something that your consumers are expecting of you as digital brands at the end of the day. So what does that essentially mean in terms of leveraging technology, right? So usually you have an onboarding stage of a consumer all the way up to them consuming their service and then actually leaving their service. And there are multiple touch points where you can potentially introduce mechanisms which ensure that you're not just collecting consent from them, but also making sure that you're actually managing their preferences as well, and allowing them to update their preferences as and when they like, having the freedom to actually do that. So essentially what we're saying about privacy by design is think about it from day one when you're designing your product or planning your product, rather than thinking about it as an afterthought. Another one, and this one's a no-brainer, right? I mean, you guys, obviously, you're actually using digital products as well at the end of the day. People don't have time in general, right? So I'm grateful to you guys for actually sitting over here to begin with. But then at the same time, when you're speaking about those digital services, I think about a fifth of them would actually give up a particular service if they can't get this job done essentially within the first minute of their action. That's a really short span of time, right? And interestingly, that statistic actually varies from one location to others. So for example, I think for some of the countries in Asia, this time was even shorter, where consumers said that, you know what, we can only wait 30 seconds for a transaction to go through. If it doesn't, you're just going to skip. Might even move to a different brand altogether. Think about this. So if you kind of extrapolate this data, right, would you be willing to get rid or have a churn of about, 20% of your consumers just because your solution wasn't reactive enough, your design wasn't reactive enough in terms of actually giving them the user experience that they need? Probably not. Something to think about. But then, no surprises, when we ask them about the different reasons, the kind of things that actually do add to their fatigue, passwordless resets, and that was unanimous, by the way, between the consumers as well as the employees, is one of the fatigue areas that they actually have in mind. What was new, though, we actually asked some of the consumers if they were aware of what digital onboarding is. And a significant majority, they actually feel that digital onboarding is a really compelling feature that you should have in your digital solutions or digital products. Again, so what, right? So first things first, when you're thinking about onboarding, and again, those from the banking industry, for them, it's fairly common for them to actually use identity verification for digital onboarding. But for a lot of the other industries, this area is still relatively new. But this is a trend that we're seeing not just in the B2C, business to consumer use cases, but even in some of the B2B use cases as well. So think about your suppliers, think about your partners, think about your brokers and agents, right? You need to onboard them and offboard them remotely as well. So you need to think about those digital mechanisms that allow you to easily onboard those users and allow them to gain access to your digital services as well. Again, don't think about it as an afterthought. Think about it as and when you're designing your different products. So one of the questions that we slipped in, somebody kind of forced me into it, but which was to actually ask them how you as employees actually deal with your organizations when you're trying to gain access to certain data as well. And even over there as well, let's not forget these consumers at the end of the day, the way that they think about how they're gaining access to corporate resources as well is changing. Their expectations are evolving. Why? Because, well, some of it is actually cascading from the behaviors that they're getting accustomed to on the consumer side of the house as well. So again, you have something like 48% employees who are frustrated with, I don't know, creating new passwords. And the big question then is, what's stopping you as digital product managers from going passwordless, right? I mean, if you walk the floor, and there's tons of options out there today where you can go and speak to different vendors who have many different offers out there, right? Question is, why not implement passwordless for those consumers? The fact is, again, this is one of those things which comes up as an afterthought. Afterthought to what? Maybe you've had some kind of a breach that has happened because of some kind of phishing attack of some sort. And a lot of those have kind of come up over the course of the past few months as well as years as well. And that eventually leads to customers to actually go and say, oh, you know what? Let me find some FIDO keys, or let me find some PKI tokens that I can deploy to actually have a phishing-resistant MFA or passwordless authentication mechanism. Great. That's a great start. However, it's not good enough, right? Because not all users are created equal. So when you're thinking about those passwordless journeys at the end of the day, you need to think about the nuances that you need to take into account for those users. And again, your workforce users are very different from your end consumers or your B2B users. So when thinking about passwordless as well, you need to think about a holistic approach that scales up for the many different kind of user constituencies that you have out there today, and for the multiple levels of assurances that you might potentially need when implementing a passwordless authentication solution. This one, and it's Identiverse, so obviously, you can't go without speaking about MFA, of course. So this question, I thought the statistic on this one was pretty interesting because I was not expecting it to be this high, which is 81% of the folks that we actually interviewed, they said that they actually expect the digital service provider to provide MFA by default. 81%. That's a huge number, right? And we keep on speaking about, how MFA introduces friction into the whole process. Our customers or users are not ready for it. They'll complain about having additional friction in the whole process. No. Look at this statistic, right? And again, this is what you need to be aware of when you're building those digital experiences at the end of the day. The perception of consumers is changing. They're becoming a lot more learned about their privacy, about the security measures that are in place. And in fact, some of them practically want you to do it, as in they want to have those capabilities in the products that you're actually offering them. So what? This is becoming a bit monotonous, so I apologize for that. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so is there a demographic against that percentage? Do you think there's different age groups that would have a different opinion than, hey, we think with them we're more secure, that we don't mind having multi-factor?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have them off the top of my head, but I remember, for instance, for certain European countries, they had, this number was even higher than 81%. In fact, in the Middle East as well. So I think we actually interviewed some of the users in the UAE, for instance. Over there, the percentage was even higher. And then when you go further into the demographics in terms of age groups as well, there is a distinction between the different demographics as well. So I'll have a link towards the end of this presentation to that report as well. You can actually find more detailed data as well. But it's a valid question. So for different demographics, you have different expectations from the users. Sure. When speaking about or thinking about MFA, again, MFA is not that simple. It's not just about handing over a token to the other organization. You need to think it through. You need to think about other capabilities as well. So you have something called RBA, or risk-based authentication, which kind of addresses the problem that you're mentioning over there as well, because for different demographics or for different kind of users, perhaps you need to have a different way of authenticating them to begin with. So you need to have capabilities like risk-based authentication, which actually allow you to take the context in mind of the user, of the kind of use case that's being implemented as well, so on and so forth. But then again and again, this term SCA, it's not as common over here in the US as much as it is in Europe, where you have stuff like PSD2, for example, which mandates banks to use SCA, strong customer authentication, which is a higher level of assurance when authenticating users. So again, by show of hands, how many of you have actually heard about passkeys, FIDO passkeys? Wow, that's quite a lot. I don't know if everyone is aware, though, not all passkeys are created equal, right? So you cannot implement strong customer authentication with synced passkeys. You need to have a device-bound passkey to actually implement SCA. So again, if that sounds gibberish, feel free to come up to our booth 2501 as well. I'd be more than happy to actually discuss that in a bit more detail with you as well. But again, when you're thinking about building these digital products, you need to think about these things, because at the end of the day, it's not just about the breach. It's something that the customers are now expecting of you. And again, we have a pretty learned audience that usually comes at Identiverse as well. So some of this would be like probably stating the obvious, right? And some of the next stats that I'm about to present to you guys are, again, stating the obvious as well. But when we asked a lot of those 12,000 folks, which kind of industries are they most favorable to give up personal data to, banking was right up there. They're a lot more comfortable sharing their data with banks, with insurance companies, with healthcare organizations. And again, it's fairly obvious, right? But the question then is, if it's fairly obvious, why do the companies in these industries at the end of the day have such a low score? Are these companies not going through digital transformation? Are they not launching digital products and offers? No, they are. The fact is, there's a lot that these industries at the bottom that they can potentially learn from all those other industries that are actually leading the pack in terms of the organizations or the industries that the consumers actually do trust. And one could argue, yes, some of those industries that we spoke about, whether it's banking or healthcare, they're a lot more regulated as well, right? So it's kind of like enforced in those industries as well. But again, imagine there is no compliance to go with, and still your consumers are actually willing to give up more information to you guys because they trust you more. Do you actually need a compliance mandate to push you into it? No. As a responsible organization, you should be doing it anyway. You owe it to your customers, right? So when we're speaking about implementing controls that actually help in securing your consumers' data, in terms of allowing them the flexibility to actually have different security controls that could actually help them, giving them the comfort that their data is safe as well, you're liable to do that anyway as a responsible organization. You do not need compliance mandates to actually push you into thinking about these things. And that's basically my takeaway slide at the end of the day. Be proactive. Don't be reactive, right? It's very typical to say, things happen after the breach, but that is essentially how it works, right? A lot of the folks who might be actually representing vendors over here, you'll have people coming over to your booth saying, oh, you know what, we had an incident. So obviously they're not going to say they had a breach. Nobody says that out loud. Nobody wants to say that out loud, right? But the fact of the matter is, when that happens, they start implementing those security controls. And it's already too late when it comes to that. So again, be proactive in terms of implementing those privacy and security controls into your digital products. And then make sure you have the flexible capabilities in the background to actually cater to those nuances in terms of demographics or in terms of different user needs, to actually be able to build your own trust equation and actually build the right products that your consumers can actually trust. Thank you.